Cops arrest black woman in military uniform. 3 minutes later, the Pentagon responds. The cuffs clicked shut around Danielle Rivers's wrists with a loud snap that echoed across the nearly empty parking lot. Her crisp military uniform, a deep green combat blouse with perfectly pressed creases, gleaming insignia on her chest, and a U.S. Army name tape stitched across the pocket, stood in stark contrast to the grimy pavement beneath her knees. "Get your hands behind your back! I said now!" Officer Chad Mullins barked, his face flushed red as he shoved her down harder. "I'm not resisting," Danielle said, her voice calm but steely. Her dark brown eyes locked onto his with measured control. "But this is unlawful detainment. I haven't broken a single law." "You're impersonating a soldier," Chad snapped, glancing toward his partner, Officer Doug Kilmer. "That uniform's a federal offense if it ain't yours, and I'm not buying that ID. Could have been printed off any laser jet." Kilmer stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at Danielle. "You know," he muttered, "for someone playing soldier, you're real composed. That's suspicious in itself." The bystanders, 3 teenagers with Slurpees, a mother clutching her daughter's hand, a cashier on her smoke break, all watched in silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The discomfort in the air was tangible. Danielle didn't shout. She didn't cry. She looked each person in the eye as if imprinting their faces in her memory, as if waiting for one of them to say something. None did. She had only stepped out of her SUV to grab a bottle of water from the quick stop. It was meant to be a short detour on the drive from Little Rock back to her hometown of Pine Bluff. Just 24 hours of leave to see her mother, and now she was on the ground, zip ties biting into her skin, her dignity slowly peeling away beneath the judgmental stares of strangers. "Call the station," Chad said, shoving his radio against his mouth. "We've got a possible fraud impersonating active military. Taking her in." Doug hesitated, glancing again at Danielle. "She gave you a real military ID and that badge." "It's fake, Doug. Trust me. This ain't my first rodeo. You know how many folks wear uniforms just to get free meals?" Danielle's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Chad hauled her up roughly, guiding her toward the cruiser. As they passed the store window, Danielle caught a glimpse of herself smudged, handcuffed, her face stoic. The little girl with the mother whispered, "Mom, why are they arresting a soldier?" The woman pulled her daughter close. "Stay quiet, baby." In the back of the cruiser, Danielle tilted her head back and shut her eyes. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. The world had changed so little. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Department smelled like stale coffee and damp paper. The cells were half full, mostly with young black men, some passed out, others slouched in corners pretending not to notice her as she was led through. "Take off her boots," Chad ordered as they stopped at the booking station. "And check for weapons. Fake soldiers love their props." The female officer assigned to intake, Officer Garcia, raised an eyebrow. "She's in uniform, full insignia, clean cuts, regulation haircut. Are you sure?" "Just do it." Danielle stood silently while they removed her boots, searched her socks, patted down every inch of her. When Officer Garcia came upon the small tracking badge clipped under Danielle's collar, she paused. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "Ma'am, you're making a mistake," Danielle said gently. "That device is classified. If you remove it without authorization, you could be violating federal law." Chad stepped forward, snatching it. "That's what they all say. Everything's always classified with your type." Garcia gave him a sharp look. "Your type?" he shrugged. "You know, the overconfident ones." Danielle's eyes narrowed. She wasn't just angry, she was calculating, but still she stayed silent. They took her phone, her ID, her gear, locked her into the holding cell with the flickering light and the damp smell of mildew. Time passed slowly. She didn't ask for her phone call. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She waited. It was Officer Tyler Brandt who first started asking questions. A young recruit, only 8 months into the force, he'd watched the arrest footage on the lobby monitor 3 times already. Danielle hadn't flinched, hadn't fought, had spoken with the tone and posture of someone who had faced death and hadn't blinked. He turned to Garcia, who was sipping her 3rd cup of bad coffee. "Something doesn't feel right," he said. Garcia didn't answer at first. Then, with a slight nod toward the evidence tray, she said, "That badge, it's real. That's an encrypted chip. I ran the numbers, but access is restricted." "Restricted like military restricted?" She nodded slowly. "Does Chad know?" he asked. "He thinks she's bluffing." Tyler turned back to the screen. Danielle sat on the bench inside the cell, perfectly still, spine straight, hands folded. She wasn't bluffing. He knew it. Back in the cell, Danielle finally spoke. "Excuse me," she called to the camera in the corner. "I'd like to make my phone call now." The request was logged and approved 10 minutes later. Chad himself brought the phone into the side room, a smug grin on his face. "1 call," he said. "Make it count." Danielle took the receiver, dialed a number by heart. It rang once. Then someone picked up. "This is Rivers. Alpha 9. I'm in custody, Jefferson County. Code red." A pause. Then the line went dead. Danielle handed the receiver back to Chad. He chuckled. "That's it? That your big play? Ain't nobody coming for you, lady." But even as he spoke, a sudden beep erupted on the wall-mounted police scanner. Then another, and another. Rapid codes being entered into the system, words like override, authorization breach, and Pentagon relay protocol. "What the hell is this?" Garcia muttered, eyes widening as her terminal blinked red and black. "This isn't local. This is Department of Defense." Then came the low rumble. From outside, engines. 6 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot like sharks slicing through water. Men and women in black suits and tactical gear stepped out in synchronized motion. One of them held a badge, not police, not FB, but something even higher. Chad stared out the window, his mouth falling open. "What the?" The front doors of the station burst open, and just like that, the silence was gone. Danielle's 3 minutes were up, and the Pentagon had arrived. The moment the front door slammed open, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department froze. Black boots hit the tile floor in rhythmic steps as a team of 6 agents moved swiftly inside. Their suits were immaculate, pressed tight against bulletproof vests, and every one of them wore the unmistakable lapel pin of the Department of Defense. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. Their leader, a tall black woman with a clipboard and steely eyes, scanned the lobby before barking an order. "Where is Lieutenant Colonel Danielle Rivers?" Officer Chad Mullins blinked like someone had just smacked the air out of him. "Lieutenant, what?" he mumbled. The woman didn't repeat herself. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out a federal ID, and held it up to Officer Garcia. Garcia stepped forward instinctively, taking the ID and skimming it. Her expression turned gray. "She's in holding," she said quietly. "Cell 4. The lead agent didn't even look at Chad as she walked past him. "Get the keys, now!" But Chad snapped out of his stupor. "Wait a second," he barked, stepping in front of her. "This is a county facility. You don't just get to storm in here like it's your backyard." That was the wrong thing to say. Another agent, shorter but twice as solid, stepped forward. "Sir, you just detained a high-ranking U.S. Army officer on active duty without probable cause. That is not only illegal, it's a federal incident." Chad puffed up, still clinging to authority. "We had reason to believe she was impersonating military personnel. Her ID didn't scan. She looked suspicious." The lead agent snapped her fingers. One of the suits passed her a small tablet. She turned the screen toward Chad. This is Lieutenant Colonel Danielle Rivers. Active. Clearance level Bravo 7, assigned to the Pentagon's Internal Threat Division. You detained her in full uniform, stripped her gear, and ignored her ID badge, which is laced with encrypted tracking. Chad's face turned the color of chalk. I didn't know, he said, voice cracking. She didn't act like military. You mean she was calm, controlled, didn't break down crying or shouting? The woman's tone was cold and clinical. Is that your profile for an impersonator, Officer Mullins? Or is it just your profile for a black woman in uniform? Silence. Garcia had already started walking toward the back, keyring in hand. Tyler Brandt followed close behind her, shaking his head like he couldn't believe any of this was real. Inside the holding cell, Danielle sat exactly where they had left her, still, collected, her back straight, even though hours had passed. When the door clicked open, she didn't look up. It took longer than I expected, she said calmly. Garcia swallowed hard. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I'm not the one you should apologize to. Garcia opened the door and Tyler stepped aside, ashamed. Lieutenant Colonel, Danielle stood slowly, fixing her collar. Save it. As she exited the cell, the lead agent saluted her. Danielle nodded. Escort her to the vehicle, the agent said to her team, then turned to Chad, who was now sweating profusely, lips parted as if to speak. We're not finished here, she told him. And they weren't. The interrogation room had never felt smaller. Chad sat stiffly under the fluorescence, his badge on the table, hands clasped together like a schoolboy expecting detention. Across from him sat a Pentagon legal advisor, and beside her a representative from the DOJ. No uniforms, no kindness, just ice in their words. You racially profiled a decorated officer. Then you refused to verify her credentials despite multiple warning signs, the advisor said. What made you so sure she wasn't who she said she was? Chad looked down. I don't know. She didn't act like military. She was too what? He hesitated. Too composed. Too confident. The DOJ rep raised an eyebrow. You mean she didn't act afraid of you? No, I mean, he fumbled. She was too calm, like she expected to be in control. And a black woman in control threw you off that much? Chad didn't answer. The advisor tapped her pen against the table. You've opened your department to a federal civil rights lawsuit, not to mention obstruction of duty. Lieutenant Colonel Rivers is one of the Pentagon's top internal auditors. She was traveling incognito, reviewing readiness at rural bases. Your actions exposed her presence and potentially compromised national security. At that, Chad's mouth fell open. She was undercover? She was conducting field assessments, yes, until you dragged her out of a quick stop at gunpoint. The door opened. A new figure stepped in. It was Chief Barnett, head of the Sheriff's Department, face thunderous. Chad, hand over your badge, he said, not even bothering to sit. But Chief, now. With shaking hands, Chad slid the badge across the table. You're suspended, pending investigation. And I wouldn't count on coming back. Outside the building, Danielle stood in the sunlight, her uniform crisp again, her face unreadable. Her SUV had been returned, fully intact. The military team had wiped her record clean from the sheriff's system, and her mission, at least for now, was paused. Agent Callahan, the lead officer who had escorted her out, stood beside her. You could sue them into the Stone Age, she said. Danielle sighed. I could. But that doesn't fix what's broken. Callahan hesitated. Then what will you do? Danielle looked back at the building, watching as Officer Brandt stepped out the side door and glanced toward her, his face tight with remorse. "I'll do what I always do," she said. "Finish the job," and with that, she got into her SUV and drove off. Not as a victim, but as a soldier, still in uniform, still on duty, and now with a new purpose. Because the enemy didn't always wear foreign colors. Sometimes it wore a badge. The next morning, the town of Millstone woke to a quiet tension. The sun rose like it always did, but something in the air had changed. Whispers buzzed across sheriff radios, behind break room doors, through the ranks of City Hall and local reporters. Word was out. Lieutenant Colonel Danielle Rivers wasn't just another black woman in camo. She was Pentagon, and she had been arrested. In the sheriff's department bullpen, Deputy Tyler Brandt sat frozen in front of his screen, watching the internal footage from 2 days ago. The video showed Chad gripping Danielle's arm, yanking her toward the squad car. She hadn't resisted. She hadn't fought back. She just looked directly at him and said one thing. "You're going to wish you had asked one more question." Now Tyler understood what she meant. He was still replaying that moment when Captain Diane Sutherland strode into the room. Diane was new to the department, a transfer from Atlanta with 20 years of clean record and no time for nonsense. She dropped a thick folder on his desk. "That's your new assignment," she said flatly. Tyler looked up. "What is it?" "A complaint trail. Civil rights watchdog flagged Millstone PD for targeting people of color disproportionately in arrests and traffic stops. Guess what popped up first?" He swallowed. "The Rivers case. And 10 others just like it. Chad was a walking lawsuit factory, and now his mess is ours." Tyler stared at the folder. "What are we supposed to do with this?" "Fix it," Diane said, "or someone from DC will." Meanwhile, Danielle stood in front of a dusty community center on the edge of town. Her boots crunched gravel as she stepped through the side door. Inside, a half-dozen folding chairs circled a coffee pot and a battered podium. "Danielle?" an older man asked, standing near the back. His voice was gruff but warm. "Walter," she replied, offering a faint smile. Walter Jameson had served 2 tours in Iraq. Now he ran a local veteran support group for rural counties, the kind often forgotten between federal grant cycles. "You came," he said. "After what they did to you?" Danielle nodded. "That's exactly why I came." By noon, more veterans filtered in. Black, white, Latino, young and old. Some wore faded army caps. Others just wore stories in their eyes. Danielle stood before them. "2 days ago," she said, "I was arrested on suspicion of impersonating a soldier. They said my ID didn't look right, said I didn't fit the profile." She let those words hang. "I've worn this uniform for over 17 years. I've briefed generals, led security operations in active zones, and I was still treated like a criminal because someone saw my skin before they saw my service." A heavy silence fell, then a hand went up. "Ma'am," a young vet named Rico asked, "how many of us do you think this has happened to, but without the Pentagon stepping in?" Danielle met his eyes. "Too many." Walter stood up beside her. "And what are we going to do about it?" Danielle looked around the room. "We build a record. Testimonies, dates, names. We show them this isn't a one-off, this is a pattern, and then we bring it to light." There were nods, then applause, and just like that, a new mission had begun. Back at the sheriff's department, Tyler sat in the records room, flipping through past case files. He wasn't supposed to feel sick to his stomach, but he did. Because once he knew what to look for, it was impossible to unsee. Case after case showed the same thing: disproportionate stops, dubious charges, suspicious behavior codes tagged almost exclusively to black and brown names. And Chad wasn't the only one. He stood up and walked straight to Captain Sutherland's office. "We have a bigger problem," he said. "It's not just Chad." She leaned back in her chair. "Show me." He dropped 3 folders on her desk, each one containing reports from different deputies, all with eerily similar language. Sutherland flipped through them, her jaw tightening. "We'll need to flag this up the chain," she said. "To who? Internal Affairs?" "No," she replied. "To the Office of Civil Rights in D.C." Tyler hesitated. "You sure? That'll put us on a national list." She looked him dead in the eyes. "We already are." That night, Danielle sat at her kitchen table, sorting through testimony forms from the veterans group. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. "This is Colonel Rivers." A clipped, firm voice came through. "Lieutenant Colonel, this is Commander Nash with the Pentagon's Internal Operations Division. We've received your preliminary report from Agent Callahan. You're requesting a special audit." Danielle exhaled. "Yes, sir. You understand that if we approve this, it's no longer just a civil matter. It becomes a federal intervention." "I understand." A pause. "Your actions will make you a target, even within law enforcement circles." "I've already been in their cuffs. There's nothing left to threaten me with." Another pause. "You have clearance to proceed. We're dispatching a liaison to Millstone by Friday." Danielle's hand tightened around the phone. "Thank you, sir." "One more thing," Nash added. "We've had reports of similar incidents in 4 other counties. Your case might just be the beginning." Danielle looked down at the stack of papers in front of her. "Then we better be ready." She hung up and glanced at her wall. Photos of her deployments, her father's old medals, and a framed citation from the Pentagon hung in quiet pride. Now she was in a different kind of war. Not one fought overseas, but one buried in plain sight, right at home. The courthouse was buzzing long before the doors even opened. News had traveled fast. A decorated black military officer arrested in uniform, footage leaked, and now whispers of a pending federal audit. Millstone wasn't just a town anymore. It had become a flashpoint. Protesters lined the sidewalk with signs that read, "Justice for Danielle and being black isn't probable cause." Reporters angled for spots near the courthouse steps, cameras already rolling. Inside, Danielle Rivers sat calmly in a plain gray suit, not her uniform. Her hair was braided back neatly, her eyes focused. She wasn't here as a symbol today. She was here as a plaintiff. Across the aisle sat Sheriff Gene Maddox, wearing a dark suit that didn't hide the sweat gathering at his collar. Next to him, Deputy Chad Wallace looked less smug than usual. His lawyer whispered to him, but Chad kept glancing at the back of the room like he expected someone to walk in and save him. Judge Marilyn Cortez, an older Latina woman with a reputation for precision, stepped onto the bench and gavelled the room to order. "This hearing is now in session. We are here to determine whether the arrest of Lieutenant Colonel Danielle Rivers constituted unlawful detainment, racial profiling, and violation of civil rights under state and federal law." Danielle stood as her attorney. A sharp and eloquent man named Marcus Colby opened with the footage. The arrest played out on screen, the aggressive approach, the refusal to verify her credentials, the dismissive tone. A collective gasp echoed as Chad's voice barked out from the speakers. "You don't look like no soldier I've ever seen." Danielle didn't flinch, but Chad did. The judge's eyes narrowed. The defense attorney tried to recover, launching into a weak argument about confusion in the field and unfamiliar ID formatting, but Marcus shut it down. "There's no ambiguity in that footage. That wasn't confusion, that was discrimination, and it's not isolated." He held up a stack of papers. "These are sworn statements from over 30 veterans in this county alone who've experienced similar treatment, most of them people of color, some of them not even in uniform, but all of them disrespected, dismissed, and dehumanized." Then he paused. And if that's not enough, let's hear from one of them. The courtroom door opened. A man in his early 60s stepped in, wearing a simple Navy veteran cap and a jacket bearing the scars of time. He walked slowly to the stand and raised his hand. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. "Walter Jameson." "And your service?" "United States Navy, 1979 to 90. Marcus approached him. "Mr. Jameson, can you describe your experience with this department?" Walter nodded slowly. "Last year I was pulled over for a broken tail light. Didn't have one. Told the officer I was heading home from my grandson's soccer game. He asked if I had warrants. Said I looked nervous. Had me sit on the curb for 30 minutes while he searched my car. Didn't find anything. Didn't apologize either. Did he ever ask if you were a veteran?" "No, sir. Didn't care." The courtroom was silent. Back at the defense table, Chad shifted uncomfortably. Walter glanced across the room at Danielle. "Seeing what happened to her? That's why I'm speaking up now. Folks like us, we get quiet, but she didn't, and that matters." At recess, Danielle stepped outside for a breath of air. A few reporters rushed over, but she raised a hand. "Not now," she said, and they backed off. From the corner of the courtyard, a woman in a dark skirt suit approached. "Lieutenant Colonel Rivers?" Danielle turned. "Yes?" The woman flashed a badge discreetly. "Rebecca Nash, Internal Operations, Department of Defense. I was sent by Commander Nash. I believe we spoke on the phone." Danielle nodded. "You're earlier than expected. The Pentagon doesn't wait when their people are arrested on American soil for wearing their uniform." Rebecca stepped closer. "I've reviewed your testimony and the background reports. What you've uncovered here, it's bigger than a single department." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "How big?" "We're talking potential class action implications, state-level corruption, maybe federal. Some of these officers are linked to training academies in other counties. If those institutions are feeding this behavior, it's systemic." Danielle let that sink in. Rebecca continued. "We need your help building this case. Quietly. Public pressure is good, but we need structure, not noise." "I can do both," Danielle said, "but I won't disappear into a back room. People are watching now. They need to see it through." Rebecca nodded. "Understood. Just be careful. The deeper we dig, the more dangerous it gets." Danielle looked back toward the courthouse doors. "I didn't come this far to stop halfway." Inside, Sheriff Maddox sat at his table with shaking hands. His aide leaned in. "They're going to subpoena internal emails, Gene," he grunted. "Then we stall, buy time, deny knowledge." But it was already too late. That afternoon, Marcus submitted a flash drive into evidence. On it were emails between Maddox and his deputies. The language was ugly. Racist slurs, jokes about black drivers, mockery of names from military IDs. The courtroom shifted from tense to stunned. Judge Cortez slammed the gavel. "These emails will be reviewed in full. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow morning. But let me be clear, what I've seen so far is deeply troubling." She stood, her eyes locking on Maddox. "And if this is the culture of your department, Sheriff, I suggest you prepare for a much bigger reckoning." The room emptied slowly, the air buzzing with outrage. Danielle walked out, not with a sense of victory, but with resolve. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And by morning, Millstone would no longer be the town that quietly tolerated injustice. It would be the battleground where it was forced to face it head-on. Danielle sat quietly in the back seat of the black SUV, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the courthouse growing smaller in the side mirror. Across from her sat Rebecca Nash, now without her sunglasses, her tone clipped but calm. "You understand what we're about to walk into?" Danielle gave a curt nod. "A hornet's nest." Rebecca didn't smile. "Worse, a federal web." They pulled into an underground parking deck beneath the Millstone County Admin Building. It was nearly empty, silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The air smelled like damp concrete and secrets. "This isn't just about your arrest anymore," Rebecca said, turning off the ignition. "We traced emails from Maddox's department to state-level security liaisons and a military recruitment board." Danielle blinked. "Recruitment board? Why would they be involved?" "Because they've been feeding names to the sheriff's office, disqualifying black candidates under false pretexts, rerouting reports. It's a filtration system designed to keep certain people out before they even get close." Danielle's stomach twisted. "And it's not just Millstone," Rebecca added. "There are patterns in 4 other counties. Sheriff departments, security contractors, even a few academy instructors involved." As the weight of it landed, Danielle exhaled, trying to absorb the enormity. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Why now?" Rebecca looked her dead in the eye. "Because you fought back, and because you wore the uniform while they tried to erase your name." They walked through a side entrance and into a conference room already occupied by 2 men in suits and a woman in Army legal uniform. Files spread out across the table. Danielle recognized the Army woman immediately, Colonel Aria Bennett, a military lawyer with a steel spine and a memory for policy that made generals nervous. "Colonel Rivers," Aria said, standing. "Glad you made it. Have a seat." Danielle sat. The man beside her began. "I'm Alan Harper, Department of Justice. We're prepping a formal investigation. But before we go forward, we need to know if you're willing to be the face of this." Danielle hesitated. "You'll be under scrutiny," Aria warned. "Not just from them, but from your own. They'll question your motives, your record, your leadership. Everything." "I'm used to that," Danielle said, but her voice was tight. "Doesn't mean it won't still sting." Harper leaned in. "This could trigger massive policy reforms. We're talking top-down restructuring, oversight boards, new hiring procedures, training overhauls." "And arrests?" Danielle asked. "That too," Rebecca said. Danielle paused, jaw clenched, thoughts racing. She thought of the protesters outside, of Walter Jameson's face, of the look in Chad's eyes when the video played in court. "I'm in," she said, "on one condition." Harper raised an eyebrow. "I want full transparency, no cutting deals behind closed doors, and I want the press involved. The people need to see it play out." Aria gave a slight nod. "We'll get pushback, but it's the right call." Later that night, as Danielle walked through her small rental apartment in silence, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "They filed a gag order," he said without greeting. "Sheriff Maddox's team, claiming this is interfering with an active investigation." Danielle sat on the edge of her couch, rubbing her temple. "They're trying to muzzle us." "Exactly, we're fighting it, but you need to lay low for a few days. Stay off TV, no interviews." "Can't," she said quietly. "Danielle." "I said I can't," she repeated. "The silence is what they count on. We're not giving them that." There was a pause on the line, then a quiet sigh from Marcus. "I'll back you," he said, "but be careful. These people don't play fair." Danielle hung up, sat in the dark for a moment, then stood and opened her closet. Her uniform hung in the back, pressed and untouched since the day she was arrested. She reached for it, then stopped. No, not yet. The next morning, chaos erupted. A local paper had published excerpts from leaked internal emails, slurs, recruitment filters, even an email thread where Chad Wallace joked about staging arrests for training exercises on minority teens. The story went viral in hours. National networks picked it up. News trucks parked outside the sheriff's office. Reporters camped at the courthouse. Protest crowds doubled, then tripled. Military veterans, Black, Latino, Asian started showing up in full dress uniform in solidarity. The pressure mounted fast. And then, just after noon, Sheriff Maddox called a press conference. He stood behind a wooden podium in front of the Millstone courthouse, flanked by his lawyer and two nervous-looking deputies. Reporters buzzed. Cameras rolled. "I want to state clearly," Maddox began, "that this department has always upheld the law. We are cooperating with investigators, and I will not comment on allegations taken out of context." A reporter shouted, "What about the email that called Lieutenant Colonel Rivers a walking diversity checklist?" Maddox's face flushed. "Taken out of context," he repeated. Then another reporter yelled, "What about the leaked footage showing Wallace laughing after her arrest?" Maddox's lawyer stepped forward. "We will not be answering questions pertaining to—" But before he could finish, the crowd parted. Danielle stepped forward, flanked by Colonel Aria Bennett and Marcus. She didn't say a word, just stood silently at the edge of the press line, arms folded, watching. The cameras swung toward her. Maddox faltered. He looked at her, then at the reporters. The moment cracked. One of the deputies at Maddox's side, a young man named Eric Rowe, stepped away and crossed the line, walking toward Danielle. "I'm done," he said quietly, taking off his badge and laying it on the concrete at her feet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maddox's face turned white. Danielle didn't move. She looked down at the badge, then at Maddox. She didn't smile, but the message was clear. "Your system's cracking, and we're not done yet." By morning, the town was no longer whispering, it was roaring. Danielle awoke to a flood of missed calls, media requests, and one simple text from Rebecca Nash. "He's cracking. Let's push." Sheriff Maddox's public statement had done more harm than good. The press had dissected every word. The badge drop by Deputy Eric Rowe had gone viral. But that wasn't the real blow. The real earthquake hit just hours later when someone inside the department released surveillance footage from the night Danielle was arrested. The video was raw, time-stamped, and damning. It showed Danielle standing calmly outside the grocery store, holding her military ID and trying to de-escalate. Wallace's voice could be heard, sneering, mocking her rank, calling her a prop with a badge. Then came the rough takedown, no resistance. No cause. CNN looped the footage for hours. MSNBC cut to a live debate. Even Fox News, hesitant at first, started raising eyebrows at how the incident had been handled. Inside the Millstone County Administrative Building, Sheriff Maddox was unraveling. "This is war," he barked, slamming a folder shut in a meeting with his senior staff. "They're trying to dismantle this department." His chief deputy, Vince Latimer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, we've got 3 more officers asking for reassignment. 2 already resigned. We can't afford—" "I said this is war," Maddox repeated. "We fight." But it was clear to everyone in the room that he was no longer in control. The system he'd built was bleeding from every corner. Meanwhile, Danielle sat in a private conference room downtown with Aria Bennett, Rebecca, and Marcus. A Pentagon liaison had just joined them via secure video call General David Renner. Square-jawed, gray-haired, and notoriously no-nonsense, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Colonel Rivers," he began, "I need you to understand the weight of what you're doing." "I do, sir." "This won't be a tidy investigation. There will be retaliation, political blowback. The Pentagon is already fielding calls from senators, governors, donors. Some want us to sweep this under the rug." Danielle didn't blink. "And what do you want to do, sir?" Renner paused, his jaw flexed once. "I want to make sure no soldier in uniform ever has to experience what you did. But if we go forward with this, if you testify before the Senate, you'll be a national figure. You won't get your privacy back. Ever." She nodded. "I've already lost enough. I won't lose my voice, too. Renner gave the slightest nod. Then we're behind you. Fully. Hours later, Danielle was on her way to the courthouse again, this time to speak at a public oversight hearing called by the state legislature. The room was packed with reporters, lawmakers, and citizens. The air buzzed with tension. She sat at the witness table, uniform pressed, ribbons gleaming on her chest, flanked by Rebecca and Marcus. Her voice didn't waver once. She spoke of the night she was arrested, of the degrading words, the unnecessary force, the attempts to erase her credentials, the silence she endured for weeks. Then she turned her testimony outward. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice rising. "This is about every service member of color who's been told, directly or indirectly, that their service doesn't count, that their sacrifice is conditional, that their uniform doesn't protect them once they step off base and walk into the world." The room went still. Outside, the streets of Millstone had transformed. Protesters lined the sidewalks. Veterans in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder, saluting as Danielle entered and exited buildings. Handwritten signs read, "She served, they hurt her. Justice for Rivers." But the real twist came that evening when Rebecca pulled Danielle aside with a tight, unreadable expression. "There's something you need to see," she said, handing Danielle a tablet. It was another leaked document. But this one wasn't about Danielle. It was about Sheriff Maddox. A confidential memo written 3 years prior from a former Department of Defense contractor. It detailed Maddox's involvement in a private security deal overseas where military-grade equipment was transferred to local law enforcement without proper federal tracking. "You're saying he smuggled defense gear into Millstone?" Danielle asked slowly. Rebecca nodded. "And falsified the procurement paperwork to make it look like federal surplus. Why would he? Control, power. He turned this department into a fortress. Look at the riot gear, the armored trucks, the military-grade drones, all illegal." Danielle's blood ran cold. "That's treason." "It's worse," Rebecca said, "because he's been using that gear on civilians, on protests, on our people." They sat in silence. Then Danielle said, "We bring this forward tomorrow." Rebecca didn't smile. "We already did." The next morning, federal agents raided the Millstone County Sheriff's Office. Doors were busted open, hard drives seized, officers handcuffed and escorted out. Chad Wallace tried to run. He made it 2 blocks before a federal marshal tackled him face first into a patch of gravel. Sheriff Maddox was not in his office. He wasn't at his home either. He had vanished. The media exploded. And Danielle? She stood at the edge of the chaos, watching it all unfold, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Marcus came up behind her. "They're saying Maddox might have crossed state lines. He's wanted now." She didn't answer. She looked toward the courthouse, toward a system she once believed in, and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "We're not done until every brick of that old house is torn down and rebuilt." And she meant it. The hum of the city had changed. Millstone, once a quiet southern town where no one challenged authority, now buzzed with anticipation. The raid on the sheriff's office had blown the lid off everything, but the storm wasn't over. It had just changed direction. Danielle stood in the war room of a secure federal facility in Atlanta. The Pentagon had upgraded their involvement from monitoring to active operations. Her face was everywhere, news screens, interview clips, Senate hearing previews. Overnight, she had become a symbol, but symbols carried weight and enemies. "We traced Maddox's vehicle to Birmingham," said Agent Marquez, flipping through live satellite images. "He's ditched the car. There's reason to believe he's trying to leave the country." "On what passport?" Danielle asked flatly. Marcus, seated across from her, tossed a file across the table. Turns out Maddox had a second identity created through a DoD contractor. Fake name, real documentation, paid for using laundered funds through local defense grants. Danielle stared at the folder. It gets worse, Rebecca added. He had access to highly sensitive communication tech. We're talking encrypted field radios, military grade. He's not just running, he's planning something. Danielle's eyes darkened. He's trying to flip the narrative, go out as a martyr. There was a heavy pause. And if he gets in front of a camera before we do, we lose control of the story, Rebecca said. Everyone in the room knew what had to be done. Danielle stood. Then we don't wait for him to talk. We talk first. That evening, Danielle appeared on 60 Minutes for an exclusive interview. She sat across from veteran journalist Maya Ellis, under the soft glow of studio lighting, not a single wrinkle in her uniform. Her voice was calm, measured, but every word struck like a hammer. There are people, Danielle said, who will call this betrayal, who will say I turned my back on law enforcement or on tradition, but I didn't betray anyone. I upheld the oath I took to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Maya leaned in. And do you believe Sheriff Maddox is one of those enemies? Danielle didn't hesitate. I believe that when someone uses power to harm the people they swore to protect, they become the very threat they were hired to stop. The nation held its breath. By midnight, the clip had been viewed 22 million times. At 2:47 a.m., a security camera caught Maddox walking into a gas station near the Florida Panhandle. He was disguised in a baseball cap and sunglasses, but it was him. By dawn, the feds had him. No gunfire, no standoff. He was found sitting in a diner, drinking black coffee, waiting for someone who never showed. There was no bravado left, no swagger, just a man hollowed out by his own arrogance. Back in Millstone, Danielle returned to her childhood neighborhood. She hadn't stepped foot there in years. It was quiet, but different now. A mural of her in uniform had been painted on a community center wall. Kids posed beside it. Veterans saluted it. She stood in front of it silently until Marcus approached. "You ready for the hearing?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's end it." The final state hearing on Maddox's misconduct began in a packed Capitol Hall. The energy was electric. Protesters filled the steps outside, but inside there was only silence. Danielle testified first. He knew exactly what he was doing, she told the panel. He weaponized the badge. He used military resources to intimidate civilians. He falsified federal records. And when exposed, he ran. Chad Wallace followed, shackled and still defiant. He tried to play victim. "I was just following orders," he spat. But this time the room didn't buy it. His words fell flat. Then came the unexpected twist. As the hearing wrapped up, the state's lead investigator stood and requested to speak. "We have one more piece of evidence," he said, holding up a flash drive. "It's a wire recording one we believe was made by a whistleblower inside the sheriff's office. It reveals a conversation between Maddox and a local judge. The audio played aloud, Maddox. I don't care what her record says. That woman walks into my town in uniform. She's still a black woman first. Make her disappear." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The judge in question was immediately placed on administrative leave. Federal investigations began into several other counties. Danielle didn't flinch. But tears welled in her eyes, not for herself, for how far things had gone, for how many others had suffered in silence. That night, as the town settled and the Capitol lights dimmed, Danielle visited the base where she'd first trained. She walked past the flagpole, hands behind her back, letting the wind play with her hair. Marcus caught up with her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word. For a long time, they just stood there. Finally, she said, "I never asked for this, never wanted the spotlight. I know, he said, but you handled it like someone who did. She smiled faintly. I just wanted to serve. And you still are, he replied. Behind them, the flag flapped quietly. Danielle looked toward the sky. I'm not done. Not even close. The fight was far from over, but now the whole country was watching. Rain drizzled softly on the steps of the U.S. Capitol as Danielle Hayes stood before a podium, her uniform crisp, her posture unwavering. The marble columns behind her loomed like silent witnesses. Reporters crowded the plaza, microphones pointed like weapons, hungry for a final word. But Danielle wasn't there for spectacle. She was there for truth. Injustice doesn't start in silence, she said, voice steady but full of fire. It starts in whispers behind closed doors, in unchecked power, in the people who look the other way. And if we're not brave enough to speak up, it grows, it spreads, until someone stops it. The crowd was hushed, hanging on every syllable. I didn't wear this uniform to be seen. I wore it to serve. I wore it to protect those who were told they didn't belong. And if one woman, one soldier standing her ground in a small town can shake the walls of power, then imagine what all of us could do together. Cameras flashed, thunder rolled in the distance, but no one moved. Then she stepped down, no victory lap, no celebration, just purpose. The fallout was seismic. Sheriff Maddox was formally charged with conspiracy, obstruction, and violation of civil rights under color of law. 3 deputies turned state's evidence, implicating an entire network of small-town corruption that had festered for years under federal radar. The judge caught on. The wire was removed from the bench. Dozens of past rulings were reopened. A statewide task force was created to review systemic abuses in rural policing. But for Danielle, the real victory came quietly. She walked into a classroom on Fort Bragg, not in full dress uniform, but in a simple polo and jeans. A group of young cadets sat waiting, unsure of what to expect. I'm not here to lecture, she said. I'm here to make sure you know what you're really signing up for. Service means something, and so does silence. One cadet raised his hand. Ma'am, were you scared when they put hands on you? She paused. Yes, I was terrified, but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right while you're shaking. A murmur of respect moved through the room. Weeks later, a little girl approached Danielle at a veterans memorial. She couldn't have been older than 9. She wore a T-shirt that said, "My mom serves too," and clutched a small notebook. Are you the soldier on the news? She asked. Danielle knelt down. I am. The girl handed her the notebook. Inside was a drawing. Danielle in uniform, surrounded by stars and holding a flag. Across the top in crayon it read, You made me brave. Danielle's breath caught. Thank you, the girl whispered. Danielle hugged her. No, sweetheart, thank you. At night, Danielle sat on the porch of her family's old house in Millstone. The air smelled like wet pine and new beginnings. Marcus joined her, handing her a drink, no words needed between them. You ever think, he finally said, what if none of this had happened? What if you'd just walked out of that diner and they let you be? She looked out at the stars. I think I'd still be here, she said. But fewer people would know what justice really looks like. A long silence passed. Then Marcus raised his glass. To the ones who fight back. She clinked hers against his. To the ones who never stop. This story isn't just about Danielle Hayes. It's about every person who's ever been told to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay in their place. It's about choosing to stand when sitting is easier, choosing truth when comfort is safer, and choosing justice when silence is expected. Danielle's journey shows us that a uniform doesn't make you powerful. Your actions do. And sometimes one voice is enough to echo through the halls of power and shake the walls built to keep people like her out. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know or someone you want to be, don't let it end here. Share it, speak it, support stories that matter. And if you believe justice isn't something to hope for, but something to fight for, subscribe, like, and follow us. Because we're not done telling the stories that others want to bury. We're just getting started.